So my name is Gundersen. I am the CEO of we are a large-scale OER developing open educational resources for upper secondary school in Norway. We have about 50 employees, teachers, creators, illustrators, and we have also about 25 contracted partners, so people that work. So in total, we are a staff of 75, and developing exam subjects for upper secondary school in Norway. And we've been doing so for 10 years. So we've covered about 100 topics that youth can have some sort of exam-related activities towards. In addition, as Camille mentioned, for the last 2 years, I have personally been involved in a global perspective to develop open educational resources and harvest open educational resources for children, and providing them an opportunity to learn to read in their own language. That project is called Global Digital Library. I'll come back to the digital library as we go through this talk. NDLA would not be so much present, but if you have any questions afterwards, please feel free to shoot me an email or reach me on Twitter. First of all, before I start talking about how open can change the perspectives and the dynamics of education, I just want to state some truly important elements that can either boost your open educational resource or kill it. And these are elements that I think we have to cover in addition to the traditional approach of licensing. And my statement can seem a bit funny when one sees it at first, but I'll explain myself, be sure. OER is only truly an OER if it is open. And it does not cut it just to cover licensing. It can actually be an issue that can be entangled into multiple aspects where you actually wish to create an OER, but where you end up creating something that is closed. And I'm going to start covering this because these elements are truly elements that we have to address to be able to change the world if we want to be truly open. So I'm just going to use a couple of minutes at the beginning of this talk to cover these basic elements. First of all, I want to address the element of the source code, the platform running OER. If you are a single human being trying to produce OER as a teacher, be sure that the platform that you develop on is open source. If you're part of a team that is going to develop an OER for university or school, be sure that the platform that you develop on or base your OER on is open source. The minute you start developing your platform with an interactive perspective, you would start getting entangled into the source code. If you keep to an open textbook, this would normally not be an issue. But if you're developing an OER with any sort of interaction, in any sort of software entanglement, this will either boost your OER platform, or it can actually kill it. So, for instance, if you have a text with two interactions, like quizzes to it, and the quizzes are developed in a closed source setting, those quizzes are not to be defined as OER. So my statement is that closed source can kill OER, and I've seen it happen many times. For instance, you probably also heard about MOOCs. Many of the MOOCs out there that you see and that claim to be open are usually not open. And I have to say, open source is one of the pillars of the internet as we know it now, and the other pillar is open standard. So open source is reckoned to be sort of the cool side of this equation. Open standard is reckoned to be the boring brother of open source, but still truly important. And here, if you're developing an open textbook, if you're developing a simple OER, keeping to open standards, standards both when you present it and when you develop it is truly, truly important. I can give you some very concrete examples here that are not just only based on the standard that you present on, but also the file format that you keep it. If any one of you are now developing small or large texts with illustrations that you're going to use for school setting, producing that content only in PDF will not cut it. It would actually sort of embed your OER and make it much harder to reuse. So keeping to the formats, for instance, HTML and EPUB, and keeping to open standards, both in terms of how you develop it and how you store it, is truly important. We actually, right now, I have a friend of mine trawling the city of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia because we got 600 great OER resources from Save the Children in Addis, but we got them on PDF. And now she's trawling the city with a big disk in her hand, going to the office to get the so-called InDesign files, because we need to reproduce them in an open format or a flexible format. I'm just going to mention this briefly. And Camille, when I sent you the slides yesterday, I actually had forgotten to repurpose my fonts. You actually got the PDF with the closed font. This is a very small fault pit, but this is a very important one. If you're producing an open textbook with a closed font, that is something you should avoid. And fonts as open source or as source code and content has a license to it. Fortunately, there are a project out there that has solved this problem. Not solved it entirely, but most of the fonts you need in any projects are out there under a free license. This is a really cool project from Google called Noto Fonts. They have produced and released very, very many different font styles, covering most of the global scripts under, and I think it is an Apache license. For those of you who are new to this, but actually, this is I've again experienced this firsthand. People producing a children's book or a book for reading, and then using fonts that are closed in a PDF that they send us. That will make it harder for reuse and harder to transmit. This is a technical part, so I'm just going to be very brief on this point. But I know that many of you are not developers, but if you're in a project developing an OER platform, you should mention or you should require the developing team to talk API first, because sharing content is something that should be a very, very sort of imminent part of the open perspective, and sharing it programmatically is something that really will make elements like this fly. Of course, large projects like Wikipedia and Khan Academy, you probably know about these. They have sort of embarked on this journey. And we, when I come back to the projects that we are doing globally and in Norway, we are launching APIs this spring. And this is something that we think we should have done earlier in the Norwegian project. And as a last point, I'm just going to sort of address something that you might think is obvious, that is free license or open license. I would say that it's important, of course, to choose a free license like a Creative Commons license, but I think it's really important that everyone goes through the motions of finding the right Creative Commons license. And I'm just going to use the example of NC in this case, non-commercial. Most of you have probably already seen this poster before. It's called, this license is CC BY. It sort of allows you to do things and allows you to copy and modify and transform. And if you go to the NC banner, they look more or less the same. So you have the same limitations, you have the same possibilities, only one difference, and that is non-commercial. And I address this because I know that many large projects developing OER over the last years have added the NC clause. And personally, I think this puts an unnecessary limitation on the resource. As we do this as a global endeavor, we want people, anyone actually, to make profit of the things that we share. And of course, there are reasons for using NC, but in general, I think CC BY and CC BY SA are the licenses that one should choose. This is my personal preference. And mostly one thinks about larger corporations as the ones monetizing or making profit. But in a global perspective, more or less everyone making profit from what we are sharing would be a small startup, a print shop in New Delhi, or a small publisher in Kampala, Uganda. These are the companies that we want to sort of push forward and have reuse our content. So that is my rant, as I call it, on open. And this is truly important because we want to be open, but we want to be developing open in a more correct way than I see the OER movement going right now. So let's address the main perspective of my talk. When I ask this question of how we can create a better world, I'm going to be very specific. And I'm going to use the example of educational materials for reading and how the perspective of open can change the dynamics of this endeavor, I would say. First of all, and this might not be known to all of you, more than 1 billion people around the world are unable to read. And the paradox of the situation is that over 90% of children, even in developing countries, are at this point in some sort of school. So we're in school, the children are in school, and more children are added every day. So the number rises from 90 towards 100%. But still, 1 billion people that has attended more than 3 years of school cannot read at all, and they cannot do any math at all. So globally, we're actually talking now about an educational crisis, and the number is growing. So last year, we were talking about 750 million, and there were some new reports this winter that has put us well above 1 billion people not being able to read. And actually, this paradox shows that the current model of building schools, printing books in languages that are less than 10 does not scale. And what we've seen is that for most of the larger languages in Asia, and for most of the larger languages in Africa, there are no resources at all available for something as crucial as reading. So for instance, for Bangla, having about 250 million people speaking the language, there are very, very few resources available. And if they're available, they're costly. So this is a sort of a very simple perspective where even putting money into it, like we've been doing for many years, does not work at all with the current model that we're approaching, where we're actually talking to publishers, trying to have them translate some books, and then selling in a market where funding is very low. And one of the main reasons we think for 1 billion people being unable to read is this paradox. The only, and beware, I have not mentioned OER yet, but here comes the shift. Because instead of OER being something that we want to streamline and that we want to sort of embed into the mainstream of education, OER here in this perspective is, in fact, the only solution. Right? And this is based on the fact that we need collaboration, we need sharing, and we need reusing amongst these languages. And localizing resources, even with the cultural sort of challenges of taking resources from one country to another, is going to be a very, very important aspect of educational resources in the future. Only in Uganda, there are about 56 languages. And there is no chance at all that Lukunzu, a small language in the mountains of Rwanda, could have any resources of high quality if localization of resources is not a part of the equation. And this last part, doing the Wikipedia approach of localizing resources, is something that I personally have been working on for many years in both Uganda, Ethiopia, and Nepal. So, based on this sort of issue of having a problem that seems hard to solve in the old ways, we have now set about sort of a journey where we've defined a global digital library, and we're going to try to not fix the situation, but try to enhance the likeliness that children all around the world can learn to read in their own language. And this is based on the simple idea that if a child can learn to read, everything changes. The setting in the family changes. The village can change their perspective on anything they do, and of course, a country can grow into something totally different if the inhabitants of the country can learn to read. And learning to read is even important in an age where YouTube is filled with tutorials for everything. This is something that we have to sort of just set as a parameter. The library that we're developing is called the Global Digital Library. And what we're doing is that we're harvesting high quality early grade reading resources and making them available on web, mobile, and for print. And we're focusing on languages that are underserved, which means even larger languages like Hindi and Bangla and Swahili. We're gathering them from projects that have developed OER. And the fortunate part of this is that we are now finding out in a very large extent that, for instance, the Americans, USAID, have had Creative Commons as part of their portfolio for many years. So they have thousands of resources available. I mentioned Ethiopia earlier, and they've actually right now found 600 high quality early grade reading books in 7 languages under a CC license. They were buried in a cupboard, in a closet in Ethiopia, and are now going to be published as part of our plan. As I mentioned, we're going to make them available on web, mobile, and for print, and we're developing a web platform that we're going to test afterwards. You're also going to be able to test it yourself. We're also integrating with a platform called Kravian, which allows for translation into more than 300 languages. In practice, this means that you can also find resources on the platform if you like and translate them into Polish. Polish will be one of the languages in the list of 300. This is a very simple example of how this goes about. This is a book called Fat King, Thin Dog. It is created by a publisher in India. It has been translated into 129 languages based on the simple idea that the illustration is important in this book, and one can actually still reuse it even if the king has some sort of an Indian feel to it. This is the English version, and as you can see, translating this page with very short text is not time-consuming. I've done this on numerous occasions, and translating a book like this with about 15 pages looking like this takes about 30 to 40 minutes. And voila, you have a book into a new language. And on the perspective of changing the world, I was in a room in Sweden 2 years ago when I first experienced this. A man from Uganda that spoke Lukunzu, he took 2 of these books and translated them into his local language. And these were the first books for early grade reading in Lukunzu ever. And for me, that is changing the world. That is changing the world for the kids that are speakers of Lukunzu. Our goals are fairly high. We're going to have resources in more than 100 languages by the end of 2020. And this might seem like a very high number, but we are collaborating with USAID, with UNESCO, with UNICEF, an organization called Global Partnership for Education. And all of these are invested tens of millions of dollars in resources over the last 5 to 10 years. And these are the resources that we're aiming for. I'm just going to quickly go through the perspective of what to expect from our project over the next months for those of you who wants to follow our development. We are right now, as I mentioned, developing a mobile app and a web platform. We have about 2,000 resources. This number is too low now. We're probably going to approach 3,000 resources by the end of April in about 25 languages. And these are going to be pushed gradually into the production-ready platform over the next year. The reason for this is because we have a quality assurance process that actually requires us to look at every resource once again before we publish it. I've personally been involved in user testing these resources in both Ethiopia, Nepal, and Cambodia, and had some really concrete experiences that show that this model can really change the dynamics of development of resources in countries that has nothing. They start from zero. As I mentioned, we've been fortunate to have the support of many large organizations, and this is the only reason why we can actually do this in a fairly short of time. We have a span of 3 years. Yeah, I think I mentioned quality assurance standards. These are important, and they have been very widely adapted amongst our partners. So, for instance, on gender equality, we want our books to be equal for women and men, and for boys and girls. And we are, for those of you who are focused on accessibility, we are nearly compliant with level 3, which is the highest level of accessibility on the most used standard. As you will see in a couple of minutes, the platform is developed mobile first. We'll do a pre-launch in Paris in actually just a bit over a week. You guys will actually be the first external parties to ever see. The Polish crowd here will be the first ones to ever test the platform out of our own sort of collaborating partner setting. But we're going to test it in Paris during the World Conference for Mobile Learning on March 27th. We'll be launching in Ethiopia in April, and we'll have 10 languages when we start. By the end of the year, we'll have at least 4. So before we go into demo mode, I just want to have you guys take something away from my talk that you can be sort of fairly concrete on. And there are 2 things. First of all, as we have not launched yet, if any one of you want to try out translation and see how that works, for instance, translating any books into Polish, you can go to storyweaver.org.em. It's a great Indian project. Good friends of mine have pushed great stories and translated them to over 90 languages. And if you start with some of the simple books, you will be able to be a translator and published in Polish within 30 to 40 minutes. If you want to start creating, we have developed a project called H5P here in Norway that allows you to create small and interactive content items that you can have either as part of your blog or as a stand-in component on h5p.org. If you don't have your own blog like a WordPress site, you can start developing content at that URL. If you want to follow the digital library, we have a blog, blog.thedigitallibrary.io. So I'm just going to try to demo with the screen share as well. Oh, first of all, I mentioned that you will be able to test it. Can you see my URL, Camille? I can enhance it.
Yes, we see your Canva.
If you are online with your mobile telephone or your computer, you can go to staging.digitallibrary.io.
I will share the link. Yeah.
I can share it in the comment section if you can comment. I can do it myself. Yeah, I see someone has been reformed. That's good. So I'll just give you some basic principles. Of course, we hope to see the Polish crowd going bananas on this and creating tons of Polish content as well. But I'm going to focus on some simple elements of African languages. So this is the beta platform of the GDL. And what you see here is the normal front page where we have English, which is would be our bridge language. We're not focusing on English, but many of our communities are going to start with English and then translate into their own language. The navigation here is fairly simple. You navigate on language, and you navigate on level. So if I now say I choose a large language in Africa called Kiswahili, I will get resources in Kiswahili. And all these resources here are licensed under Creative Commons. If I want to read a book, I go into the book and I either read it or I download the printable version. If you see this on video on mobile telephone as I'm going through it, you will see that the platform is actually developed for mobile. As this is in Swahili, I'll go back to the front page and choose English so that it's readable. If I choose one of these really great illustrated books for kids, these should be relevant also for the Polish crowd. You will see that translating a book like this is not very difficult and does not consume too much time. But the illustrations that I'm showing you now, they are actually really hard to make well. So the upside of translation here is really great. And this book, I think, is a great example of a book that has no sort of immediate cultural aspect that will sort of kill the story if it was translated into Norwegian, for instance. As you see, we have a license here, and we have levels. The leveling is fairly simple. It's level 1, 2, 5 in this case, and 1 being simple, short text, and 5 being longer text and more complex stories. As you see here, the front page here is a book called Singing in the Rain. Again, it's an Indian book from Pratham Books in India. And I've actually personally experienced taking Indian content to Africa, and it might seem like a cultural leap of sorts, but as the stories usually have some sort of like this a dinosaur component, they usually travel well, is my experience. The goal is, as I said, to have in this list here about 40 to 50 languages within the end of the year and 100 languages in the list by the end of 2020. We're just now we're finishing the development of translation. So if you come into our service in about 1 month plus, you will find the option of translating the book within the platform. So if you want to join us and do some Polish stuff, that will be great. But I would say that on the first question of my talk, how we can change the world and how open can play a part, the reason why I'm so involved in this and so engaged is because I see it absolutely every day. I see how very, very small amount of resources from a good teacher or even a student can make changes and can create a setting where stories are translated into a language where there is nothing. So even 10 or 20 translations can really, really change the setting of a community trying to read in their own language. All right. I think I'm just going to mention as a last point that even though I'm Norwegian, it might seem funny that a Norwegian man and his team for Asian and African students. I have to emphasize that we've been really focusing hard on user experiences. So we've been traveling extensively to user test the platform, both in Ethiopia, as I mentioned earlier, and in Cambodia. This girl here is something I'm going to finish with a picture of her, because at the point of the picture being taken, she is presented with a smartphone for the first time. And that might seem like a really tough job, but the gentleman on the left here, the boy that you were just seeing on the screen, he had some experience with a smartphone, and he taught her how to just start browsing books, and within 5 to 10 minutes, she was reading books on the smartphone like she had never done anything else in her entire life. So that is sort of the end note for me on the question of how you can change the world. Without open as a perspective here, there would be no books. Without open as a perspective here, there would be books for some of these children, but they would cost much more, and the quality would be much lower. And for most of the 2,000 languages that we're trying to sort of have as a broad community here, there will be no books, even a few. There will be no books in the language at all. So I think I'll just end with that, Camille, and I'm open for questions.
We wanted to thank you, and this is your picture redrawn as you were speaking.
Hey! Oh, you're making me look too good.
We'll send you the scan. We have Marta on the other side of the table, and she's drawing all the presenters today. So that's kind of our thank you. And we have some questions, but Ola will be speaking to you. And I just wanted to thank you for the presentation. We have a lot of appreciation in Polish for your work. So.
Hi. Yes, I have a question. Because it's really nice, and this international idea of translation is very, very good. But if you are a teacher in Poland, how you should start? What we should do first? And is it any possible to involve also your students to this?
Yeah, it's a very relevant question. And I think if you wanted to scale in a community, you should have 2 tiers. This we've tried many times. Using students maybe at a college level or a university level, together with a professor or a teacher, would make the scale. So, for instance, in Ethiopia, we've had a group of 20 students together with 3 professors, because the professors will do the quality assurance, and the students have translated materials into their own language. So, and getting started here and seeing how easy it is really is the magic of it all. So I mentioned the link Storyweaver. I would start there, or with H5P if you want to create your own stuff.
Okay, so you can find some instructions and everything you need on this site, yes?
Absolutely, and doing the translation is something that most people that could use Word, for instance, Microsoft Word, it's not more complex than that. So it's a very intuitive process.
Okay, thank you very much. I love this idea to make the world better, and I really thank you for this. I think we don't have any questions from our participants. Oh, yes, we have question. How do you plan to deal with different direction of reading pictures, example in Arabic, or different color meaning in different cultures to avoid misreading or misinterpretation of story?
Yeah, that is a very relevant question from Magdalena. First of all, we will have Arabic read in the natural opposite direction, and we on our platform we separate illustrations from the text. So in any setting where we do Arabic, we will naturally go in a different direction. I think the perspective of colors, as you mentioned, there are many cultural sort of fall pits that we can go into. So we all know about the holy cow in India. We don't want sort of to there are some cultural aspects. For instance, dogs in Rwanda is something that you cannot bring into a story at all. And colors have meaning. What we do is that we, for each country, for each language, and for each location, we are not the translators. It's the local translator. So if they're presented with 50 books, for instance, in Nepal, they start screening for cultural fall pit. And they start screening for instance, colors. If the color combination has a meaning, they would take out that book and translate another one. So that is a very relevant question.
Okay, we have also a question from Kamil. He wrote from my computer, so that's why it looks like my question. Are there any teachers from Poland, Polish teachers in Norway, you know about the work on NDLA already?
Well, that is actually a good question because we have a huge Polish community in Norway. So one should reckon that we have some Polish resources. But I don't think I have any employees that are from Poland. I should probably fix that quickly because one good idea, of course, is starting to translate some of the resources from Norwegian as well. Camille, I'll take that into account when I hire in the next round.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think it's everything for today. So it was really a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.